Coming up on this episode, it's out with the New Order and in with the Old Blood as I return to Castle Wolfenstein.
John throws continuity to the wind as he looks at games that rewrite history.
Imagine an alternative world where this show's not on TV.
Aoife makes like Darwin and charts the evolution of the FPS, and these lovable chuckleheads reminisce about the shooters of old.
The era-defining shooter for me was Duck Hunt.
It's truly trigger-happy TV on this week's Video Game Nation. Back in the 1970s, a Japanese film studio called Nakatsu made a bold decision. Faced with dwindling box office returns, they decided to branch out into erotic cinema. Serious filmmakers could still make whatever they wanted as long as the films met a minimum quota of nudity and love scenes. The so-called pink films that emerged from this period proved to be a hit with audiences and critics alike, satisfying the artistic demands of the latter and the base expectations of the former.
2014's Wolfenstein: The New Order felt a bit like that. Of course, there was plenty of crowd-pleasing violence and a plot involving robots, moon bases, and super concrete, but this pulpy gunplay was punctuated by unexpected moments of tragedy, poignancy, and tenderness.
Much like the directors of those Japanese adult films, it felt as if developer Machine Games had been given carte blanche to put its own intelligent stamp on one of the dumbest series in gaming history, so long as it still met the required quota of evil fascists getting shot.
Despite a relatively lukewarm critical reception, The New Order's popularity grew steadily as word spread that there was a modern first-person shooter that actually prioritized a captivating solo campaign over multiplayer. In fact, it didn't have multiplayer at all, which is tantamount to commercial suicide if you listen to idiots.
Its memorable cast of characters and by turns moving and mad story was married to action as brawny and powerful as its hero. This was a shooter that felt like it belonged to a sadly bygone age and was all the more refreshing and gleefully bonkers for it.
Obviously there's a lot of weird stuff in Wolfenstein, but for me the most insane thing is just the level of stabbing. Just have a day off, just less stabbing, it's insane.
Just how unbelievably good looking BJ Blazkowicz is, like almost to the point where I was like, good Lord, I'm just gonna take a moment here.
The most insane thing in Wolfenstein is fascism. That is mental.
Almost a year to the day of the New Order's release, we now have a curious standalone expansion to Wolfenstein's cavalier take on history.
In The Old Blood, we rejoin introspective one-man army BJ Blazkowicz across two very distinctive chapters in his battle against the fascist regime. The first is very much business as usual, an infiltration mission within the walls of Castle Wolfenstein, minigun-toting automatons, and a sadistic, dog-obsessed villain who loves feeding prisoners to Greta, his prized German shepherd.
After a disappointingly frustrating opening, it soon settles back into a familiar mix of light exploration and combat situations that give you the choice of either stalking your jackboot-wearing prey in the shadows or charging in like it was 1992.
Run and gun or slow and stealthy? I actually choose the third way, which is the hide and then hide some more, then give up and go and play Just Dance.
And I think my approach is like most people's, which is I like to think that I'm really stealthy and awesome, and then about 5 minutes in I completely balls it up and have to just shoot everything that moves because I've ruined it.
Slow and stealthy every single time. It's so much more satisfying to clear an area of any game by using tactics and skill and patience, and just running in and just firing out a load of bullets and then hoping you can find a rock to hide behind so you don't die 10 seconds later. I don't understand anybody who just piles into games. Slow and stealthy is the correct way to play those games.
Although there's nothing wrong with it, especially if you felt that the New Order could have benefited from a few more hours play, the promise of camp hijinks offered by the Old Blood's B-movie artwork isn't really delivered on. Blazkowicz is still a dour philosopher, doling out mumbled poetry when you sort of wish he'd ditched the self-aware patter and spout daft one-liners for a bit instead.
This would be fine if it kept up the superior character work seen in the New Order, but sadly Blazkowicz spends most of his time putting the iron into Wolfenstein.
Fortunately, things pick up in the second chapter, when things all go a bit Indiana Jones and the Germans accidentally unleash an ancient supernatural evil that reanimates the dead and sets them on fire for some reason.
There's a fairly slim stab at replay value when you're forced to choose to assist one of two supporting characters, but your decision doesn't appear to have any real repercussions besides making you feel terrible about yourself.
Also bolstering the Old Blood's replay potential is Challenge Mode, a rather hastily cobbled together score attack that's ruined by unnecessarily long load times. More entertaining are the 8 hidden nightmare levels based on stages from 1992's Wolfenstein 3D. While these are an enjoyable trip down memory corridor, it's a shame that exploring and completing these fairly tricky bonus retro areas offers apparently no benefits for the main quest.
Although it's pretty obvious that the Old Blood was originally intended to be 2 standalone DLC packs, the pair combined provide a generous, well-crafted extension to an unexpectedly excellent game. It's not quite the champion blend of storytelling and saucy Japanese lovemaking, sexy American action that made the New Order such a winner, but at a shade under 15 quid, it's still a very worthwhile investment. Hey, do you remember when that guy built a city under the sea in the 1940s, but then everyone got superpowers, went mad and started killing each other? No, me neither. John Robertson does though, but that's probably because he used video games to teach himself history.
Wait, this way!
Hello, television friend. Hi, Def. High five. There's an old saying about American troops in the Second World War, and it goes, if it wasn't for us, you guys would all be speaking German, which of course is true, unless you say it in Germany. Alternate history games are like that. Something vital has been added or removed to the timeline, and now Mother Teresa is a zombie who flies around on a jetpack at night and fights for truth, justice, and the orphan blood she needs to live.
We've already covered Red Alert, the series where Albert Einstein starts a nuclear war by disintegrating some loser with a haircut. So these are 5 more games that look at the passage of time and ask, but what if this happened instead?
I mean, imagine an alternative world where this show's not on TV. The original Civilization is one of the most important strategy games ever made, where you'll take a nation and raise it from the Stone Age to the Space Age with just a little bit of competition from the rest of the world.
You'll build a culture, a military, cozy up to famous world leaders, including the surprisingly popular Joseph Stalin.
What is it with video games and Joseph Stalin? He's in tons of them. He killed 60 million people. It's like game developers just went, oh, well done, high score.
And lead your nation to victory, and maybe Alpha Centauri.
Civilization's famous for being as deep as that name implies, but my favourite thing about it is that thanks to a bug in the original game, Mahatma Gandhi, the peace lover so peaceful that his approach to tanks was literally, oh, just lay down,
is absolutely obsessed with nuclear weapons.
Every nation starts off with an aggression rating, and if a specific set of conditions are met, Gandhi's jumps from 1 to 255.
And suddenly his approach is less passive resistance and more atomic annihilation.
Shove that up your moustache, Stalin. Dynasty Warriors is a cluster of beat-em-ups based on the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, a legendary Chinese novel that's as related to Chinese history as a fart is to a symphony.
But what if there was a rip in the fabric of space and time and the guys from feudal China suddenly had to fight a space alien and guys from feudal Japan?
If it sounds silly, that's because it is, and gloriously so. Take 2 of the most violent, interesting time periods of 2 different nations.
Let the world change based on what the player does, and then plonk in an alien.
And that's how you turn history into an episode of the Power Rangers. Glorious. Released in 1993 by the Bitmap brothers,
The Chaos Engine is a tale of mercenaries running wild in a United Kingdom, ununited and de-kingdomed by a rampaging time machine called the Chaos Engine.
they called it the Chaos Engine. What did they think was going to happen?
With humans turned into ravenous monsters, there's only one solution for our heroes. Shoot everybody. Lots.
Trivia. There are 6 types of mercenary to pick, one of whom
The preacher was changed to the scientist in all North American releases because the idea of a priest killing people might be considered offensive, but a scientist doing it is okay.
Because scientists don't have feelings, they were drained out when their parents had them vaccinated. Harlan Ellison is a talented science fiction author of such swaggering ego that this 1995 adventure came with a picture of his face on the front and a mousepad that had a picture of his face on it, in case looking at it wasn't enough and you felt compelled to rub him with your fist.
Based on his short story of the same name, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream is the world ripped apart by a supercomputer created to wage a war beyond human comprehension. It's a feast of insanity and genocide, and the game's unwinnable. Actually, properly designed to be unwinnable.
I nearly bought this when I was 8. You know that world I suggested where this show's not on TV? That's the world where I bought this when I was 8. I wouldn't be on television. I'd be locked up in a home for the criminally insane, just quietly muttering to myself. Steampunk, proof of Beyonce's old motto, if you like it, you should have put a cog on it.
We're back in Japan, and it's the world's only dating sim meets giant robot warfare RPG, Sakura Wars, released for the Sega Saturn in 1996. Set in Japan's Taisho period, this is a world where steam means there are giant robots, and they can only be piloted by women, and the women have to pretend to work for an opera company so nobody knows they're piloting giant robots, and also there are demons, which is why there are giant robots.
Opera singing lady-only mechs doing battle with the minions of hell. How successful could that have been? Well, it got a movie, a manga, 5 remakes and 11 spin-offs. Shove that up your moustache, Stalin.
In an alternative timeline, Video Game Nation is so beloved by the public that the Queen herself decrees that it must never be interrupted by ad breaks. Unfortunately, this is not that timeline. See you in 3.
Hoping that some sort of soldier's face will reveal a room with like extra ammo or body armour.
Willkommen zurück. It's been 23 years since Wolfenstein 3D laid the groundwork for the modern first-person shooter. Since then, the once revolutionary FPS has evolved and mutated into one of the most popular, some would say overused, gaming genres around. But does that necessarily mean that they've become better? I'll leave that one for my fellow experts to decide.
I think the original Wolfenstein and Doom and the games that came out in that era, unlike the games today, they couldn't kind of rely on gore and really realistic graphics and just endless stabbing, you know, because the technology was limited. So it became about creating this kind of atmosphere and tension and really about dramatic action rather than sort of visual impact. And because of that, I think those games were really effective at drawing you in and making you feel like you were in this world and your life really was on the line and there was danger around every corner.
Also, what's great about the old retro shooters, there's definitely a maze element. You know, it's like being in a hedge maze. You're trying to find your way through the levels. You know, old shooters weren't linear the way today's shooters are. They were, you know, go and find like about 7 different key cards, and oh look, there's a secret door with like a chain gun in it and stuff. And it's like that kind of design, I think, is really, it's quite intricate, it's quite compelling, and definitely more immersive than the sort of side-scrolling platformers and stuff that you had in that same time.
Secret passageways. Just literally, it's nothing to do with anything else to do with the game. It was the fact that there were secret passageways, and we all know young and old loves a secret passageway because life, you have to go through doors all the time and it's boring. We secretly just want to go through amazing passages that we never knew were there. And you haven't really lived unless you just walk down a wall, you know, hitting spacebar, hoping that some sort of soldier's face will reveal a room with like extra ammo or body armour.
I think what shooters did well then and do well now is they're very engaging on a kind of second-to-second basis. You're always kind of looking for something, which is it's something that really only shooters and Twitch games can do. They keep your brain constantly working.
I think it's easy to forget just how exciting those games were when they first came out, because they haven't aged well. I mean, they're still quick, they're still very, very fast, but they, you know, graphically they look very dated. But that was one of the first times in gaming you could really whiz around in a fully 3D environment, you know, albeit a 3D environment with flat walls covered in fascist iconography.
I think I actually am a bigger fan of the old style of shooters than I am the new style of shooters, mostly because I'm kind of rubbish and I can't aim a gun, which means that those shooters weren't focused about whether or not you could just get a perfect headshot. Those shooters were focused on, can you find your way through this maze? Can you avoid enemies and damage? Can you, move quickly and efficiently? And those are all things that, are much more appealing to me as a gamer than just, here comes another wave, kill them, here comes another wave, kill them.
I think there's room for both that sort of very simplistic, just point the thing and shoot at it style. There is something very satisfying about the slightly more sophisticated mechanics in modern games, but at the same time, sometimes you just want a bit of time crisis, don't you? You just want to pick up a big plastic water pistol looking gun and just stand on a speedboat and shoot someone jumping off a skyscraper. It's not a lot to ask.
I think that, I'm glad that things have moved forward, because I always think that gaming should move forward, and it's cool to have nostalgia, but that should always be in the past, because we should always be pushing for the next best thing. And after playing like a multiplayer game of like Call of Duty Advanced Warfare and just feeling the fast pace and just how frenetic and crazy it is, even if you're completely losing, there's nothing quite like it, the adrenaline.
It's interesting because what I like about modern shooters isn't necessarily the actual shooting. I've done a lot of shooting now in 20-ish years of playing video games, and so what tends to interest me about a good shooter now is like BioShock, it's the environment. Something like the new Wolfenstein, it's the story. It's very rarely the feeling of just having a gun and shooting it. What a shooter needs to interest me now is a lot of stuff around it. It needs character, it needs interesting art, it needs something like that.
I think the thing is, your memory of it is always better than the reality. I don't know if you've gone back and played GoldenEye since, but it's not aged well. It still sort of plays all right, but it doesn't look great. The control scheme is very clunky because we hadn't really worked out what the correct way to control games like that was at the time, and targeting with the weapons is a bit bad, but for all its problems and for all the reasons it's aged badly, it's still got a really special place in my heart, because that will always be the game that defined my experience of those sorts of games. That was the thing that went, this is a new sort of thing that you can enjoy. So that I'll never have that experience with another game, no matter how good it is. GoldenEye was it.
My favourite retro shooter is Doom. Doom is so good, and it's so underrated today in a weird way. Like, people know that Doom is important and that Doom is good, but I don't think a lot of people have played Doom recently. And if you play Doom, you realise how insanely well considered it all is. It's the kind of game that you can get very, very engrossed in, which most campaign modes of first-person shooters nowadays, it's just not true.
Yeah, obviously there was Doom, there was Wolfenstein, there was all those brilliant shooters, but really the era-defining shooter for me was Duck Hunt, because it was brilliant. And of course in those days everybody had a bowl haircut, so what was nice was you could sort of line up the light gun with the top of your haircut, your fringe there, and just get a good angle. And it was hours of fun. Yeah, it really was.
I'm going to go for something that's old but with a bit of a new twist, which was I was once introduced to something called the Doom piano, which is a piano that you can play Doom on. So imagine that all the keys are basically like your controller, and you run. It's quite difficult actually, to be honest with you. Like strafe is over here, like left is there, right is there, but you kind of look like you're playing something. It's quite an entertaining thing. Adding that extra element of having a ye-olde time piano into the equation was quite fun.
My favourite retro shooter is GoldenEye, because I spent about a year and a half trying to circumvent my parents' very strict regulations on video games to be able to play it at various friends' houses, so I enjoyed it so much whenever I did.
My favourite shooter is GoldenEye on the N64. That completely hijacked my time at university. If I hadn't been playing that every day at university, I would probably now have an incredibly well-paid job in the city rather than earning a few quid a week playing computer games in my pyjamas. And for that, I am eternally grateful.
Do we prefer our FPSs old school or with a little bit of a modern edge? I don't know. Personally, I have plenty of room in my heart for both. Take Wolfenstein for example. Wolfenstein 3D was a perfect example of the genre in 1992. And yes, that game is 23 years old, I checked, and yes, you should feel old. But Wolfenstein The New Order is such a modern, self-aware and surprisingly great game in so many ways that it's impossible not to root for it too.
Actually, the Wolfenstein series is a pretty perfect example of just how much the first-person shooter has changed in the last 20 years. Whereas in the beginning it was all running, gunning and pixelated gore, now it's Well, it's running and gunning and gore, sure, but it's also become a staggeringly lucrative and surprisingly diverse genre. In the early days, it was all about the thrill of the hunt. The likes of Doom and Quake were all about the simple joy of obliterating aliens and demons into big, sticky puddles on the floor. But N64 classic GoldenEye 007, released in 1997, loved its set pieces. And stretching Sean Bean and Robbie Coltrane's faces in ways they were never meant to. GoldenEye showed that first-person shooters could be cinematic blockbusters with a real story. And just a year later came a game that drove that point home whilst becoming one of the most iconic FPSs there has ever been. Half-Life, which put players in the role of bespectacled theoretical physicist Gordon Freeman, married satisfying shooting with intelligent puzzle solving, and told a fascinating story without using cutscenes. Players had to pay attention to their surroundings and use their wits, as well as Gordon's iconic crowbar. Half-Life also gave life to another FPS staple, Counter-Strike, which started out as a Half-Life mod. Though online play and competitive tournaments certainly played a part in Counter-Strike's longevity, over the next few years the most famous FPS juggernauts would come to the fray. Games including Halo Combat Evolved in 2001, Call of Duty in 2003 and Battlefield 2 in 2005. The unprecedented popularity of these games carried the FPS genre to new heights, selling the games and the consoles to play them on by the bucket load. And it was all down to the rise of online multiplayer. So well loved has multiplayer become, especially since the release of 2007's Modern Warfare, that nowadays it's common knowledge most players picking up a copy of Call of Duty will never finish its single-player campaign, no matter how lavish or big budget its production. But that's not to say story has been completely cast aside. Though most military shooters now focus on online play and the competitive esports scene, some games are still focused on telling a story. 2010's Borderlands, set in the ultra-colourful, highly stylised post-apocalyptic world of Pandora, merged FPS play with RPG elements, and had a very funny script stuffed with stereotype-busting characters that made the game a genuine breath of fresh air to play. And you didn't have to experience it alone thanks to its 4-player multiplayer, which allowed you to relive the split-screen glory days of titles like GoldenEye 007, which had become rather scarce since the rise of online. In the last 5 years or so, we have of course seen near endless sequels of all the most popular franchises. And perhaps, finally, some signs that their dominance in the genre might be coming to an end, with titles selling progressively less than they used to. We're also seeing some fresh blood and new ideas in brand new franchises like Titanfall and Destiny, made by the same team that brought us the original Halos. These online-only games forsake story in the hopes that constant updates and patches will keep people playing with friends, and in Destiny's case at least, it seems to be working. Personally, I'm a little bit old school in that I like my first-person shooters to have a bit of story, which is why I love the Wolfenstein reboot so much. It refuses to go down the multiplayer route and instead spends time crafting a story and characters to really believe in. I hope, despite just how many games focus on the online experience nowadays, that more games follow in Wolfenstein and Borderlands, and even Half-Life and Portal's footsteps. The first-person shooter can be so much more than shooting, and history proves it.
What are your thoughts on FPSs? Happy with the way they are? Wish they were like they were? Yearning for real change? Whatever your thoughts, share them with us on our official Video Game Nation Facebook page or on Twitter using the hashtag VGN, or by perfecting the art of telepathy and beaming your thoughts directly into my brain. Until next time, happy gaming.
Thank you.